everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing, and very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. In the case of this month's guest, Lindsay Lerman, she was recommended to me by both Megan Lamb and Dave Fitzgerald. So if you liked those episodes, you'll like this one, and if you like this one and haven't heard those, go back and take a listen. Lindsay Lerman is a writer and translator. Her book, I'm From Nowhere, was published from Clash in 2019. Her second book, What Are You, is also published from Clash in 2022. Her essays, interviews, short stories, and poems have been published in the Los Angeles Review of Books, New York Tyrant, The Creative Independent, and more. She has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada, and she currently lives in Berlin. If you would like to help out Writing the Rapids, that's a show, you can do so by giving me money. There's a couple easy ways to do that. Patreon.com/NoisemakerJoe. For a couple bucks a month, you get early episodes. For a one-time donation, you can chuck some coins over at paypal.me/NoisemakerJoe, and you can also buy my book. It's called Tired. It's on Amazon. You should be able to find it pretty easy. You can also help the show out for free by retweeting my tweets about it, following me on Twitter and Instagram, blogging about it, saying nice things about it, giving it an appropriate rating on the place where you listen to it, or just by lighting a candle and chanting my name several times on a moonlit night. That might help too. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Lindsay. I think the biggest sort of thing that I was picking up on between the two books is this push and pull between agency and desire, where the sort of main characters like almost have their desires like ripping their agency away, where it's like I want, and sometimes the desire is nebulous, where it's just like I know that I want something, and I'm from nowhere. Luke and Andrew represent certain aspects of desire, and so she's kind of like being led there, but like resenting the leading at the same time, and it's very sort of complicated, and yeah, that's sort of like what I was seeing a lot.
Yeah, well, that's, to me, that's just true to life, you know, and I'm not a realist. I don't aim for realism, obviously, in my work. Otherwise, I don't think I would write anything, you know, if I tried to be a strict realist. But I think what matters to me is like getting internal states, not realistic, but kind of correct or true, you know, feeling real in some sort of a way that matters to me and that I think matters to a certain kind of reader. So that's just true to life, you know, like we don't really understand our desires. And I'm highly suspicious of people who say that they understand all their desires perfectly, because I don't see how that's possible. You know, we're these creatures who are composed of like thousands of other creatures, millions of other creatures, right down to the cellular level. And when you think about like all the microbes in our guts and stuff that we are starting to slowly understand, like that affects our cognition and our behavior. Like there's so much we don't understand about who and what we are and why we are the way we are. So to me, it's just really important to have, especially the women that I write, to just have some sort of some weight, you know, a reality as opposed to being realistic, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so, I mean, I haven't talked about I'm From Nowhere in a long time, so this is kind of a fun treat to think back to it. But yeah, I was really thinking a lot about how our desires construct us, and then also they are often our undoing, which is not always negative, right? Like I think there's a really positive sense of undoing, and I worked that into I'm From Nowhere from the beginning, because I don't know what it's like for you to have fallen in love, but I know that for me it's a complete undoing of who and what I am, and then a total like from scratch rebuilding. You know, there's some sort of core that sustains, of course, but it's undoing in this very vulnerable and challenging way.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how true that is to my experience. I think because I feel like I've talked about it on the show before, but I met my wife when we were 16, and we started
Oh, wow.
dating shortly after we met and never stopped, and now we're 30. So I think that process is probably true. I'm definitely not the same person I was when I was 16, thank God. But
Yeah.
I think to write a book about it'd have to be too long of a book. So I think
Yeah.
condensing it is a good thing. But yeah, I think there's like fundamental things there about
Well,
who I am
yeah,
that are
yeah,
different.
and for sure, I'm sure. And in the book, I also wanted to make it clear that she's also the main character, Claire. She's also undone by the world, not
Mm-hmm.
just by desire, not just wanting other men or not knowing what to do with the desire of other men. It also has to do with her relationship to the world. She's undone and then remade by the glance of a dog and by a bird that she's watching and observing. It's really not just limited to like capital R romantic love situations. To fall in love with something or even a moment is to be continually undone or to have the possibility of being continually undone by the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then on top of that, it's sort of a near future
Yeah,
mid climate
yeah,
catastrophe sort of situation too,
yeah,
which was fun for me to read in that it almost gave me the solace of understanding that like life will continue to go on,
mm,
even as things get worse. At least for those of us who get to survive to the
yeah.
very end. Like, was it Claire's dad who said when she was talking about having kids, or maybe it was John's dad, like the world's been ending for a long time and people keep having kids.
Oh, I don't even remember if I wrote that in there. I mean, I think it's true, but yeah, it's always been ending, and we've always been continuing if we can, because we're very tenacious, strange creatures.
Yeah, and what else would we do?
I know.
Um,
I know. Yeah, I'm glad that you picked up on the climate stuff. To me, that was one of the most important elements of the book, even though I didn't do it in a very splashy or loud way. I think it's quiet, but that was one of the reasons why I wrote it the way I wrote it. I was really feeling a lot of grief for the way the world was changing really rapidly, like a decade ago. When it was becoming suddenly very, very clear that we were at this kind of tipping point. And it felt like around a decade ago when like that was just kind of an inescapable fact, and a lot has changed since then, and we hardly even know how to use the word fact anymore. Things have gotten kind of crazy, but I was really, I mean, environment and place was so important to me with that one, and I wanted to capture the feeling of being inside being a consciousness, being a body, going through the the heartbreak, but also the sort of indescribable beauty of watching a place change and become inhospitable to you. And I needed to have that in the book, and it was very strange to me when at first it seemed like a whole bunch of people just didn't pick up on that, or maybe they needed it to be louder or bigger or something. It really made me realize how the literature landscape is different than I thought it was.
mm, that's interesting. I've
Yeah.
I've been, I don't know, maybe just over a year ago now, met a group of writers and joined their Discord, and there's just been a lot of like eco poetics talk in
Yeah.
there. So I'm very kind of saturated in that headspace.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a couple other like indie lit books that I've read over the past couple of years that take place sort of like mid apocalypse.
Yeah.
And just the how everybody kind of picks up on the mundanity of it. And I feel like even in like that's why The Walking Dead starts with a guy waking up from a coma, right? Like
Mm.
you can't, I guess they have a series now that's sort of like more at the very beginning of it and stuff, but like the initial series starts out with that just kind of like blink and we're in a different world now, because that like goopy middleness is
Yeah.
hard to you never really know when you're post-apocalypse, I guess, until you've been
No.
there for a while.
Yeah, I don't know how we could ever know, right? We have no idea what post-apocalypse is or mid-apocalypse. We don't know what we're going through. We don't know where we are. You know, in 100 years, will we know? I don't know. But
Yeah.
I've actually never seen The Walking Dead.
Oh, that's funny. I only ever watched
Yeah.
the first season. I was like the perfect age for,
Yeah.
they're doing a high budget zombie TV show. Well,
Right.
I'm however old I was, 17 or whatever, and like that's perfect. And
Yeah.
it premiered on Halloween, so all my buddies were together at like a house. It was a big event, and then I just kind of fizzled away from it. But
Yeah. Yeah. Zombies are fun though.
yeah, I think so. I think there's, the various things that they can allegorically be
Yes.
are important. When were you writing I'm From Nowhere? I read the foreword of the edition that I have that you wrote in the summer of 2022. But when was the writing?
The writing started, let's see, in like 2010 actually. Yeah, way back then. It was just scraps and ideas. I had a few scenes that came to me, and this character came to me. So I was also I was a student, I was working on a dissertation and doing a couple of other jobs. And I was really just struck by how much I loved being with this character. Well, all these characters, really, not just the main character. I loved them. I've said this elsewhere, and I know it sounds a bit strange, but I really feel like the characters kind of set up shop in me.
Mm.
And I was just learning to recognize what that feels like. And so it took me quite a while to accept that I was going to need to write this, or it would kind of be, I don't know, like lingering in me forever, in an unhealthy way, like energy getting stuck in you or something. So I just started writing it little by little by little by little. A, I didn't have a lot of time. B, I had no idea what I was doing. I never do anyway, really. I'm smart, but I really have no idea what I'm doing ever. And I just had this vision of a woman throwing a whole bunch of things over a balcony. Maybe I wrote that in the foreword, I think.
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up cutting that scene from the book because I thought it was just pointless or just not what I wanted it to be. But yeah, it was 2010, and so I worked at it for quite a while, slowly. And work is not the right word either. English is not the best language when it comes to talking about what it means to create and creation. But just little by little, I created it little by little. And then it also took quite a while to figure out how to publish it. And, now I'm here.
Now you're here. So that's interesting that you say the characters came to you. I feel like when I write, I'm like taking an aspect of myself and then forming an identity around it. And then I'm kind of like exhuming that part. Like it kind of feels like every project I work on is a kind of exorcism.
Yeah.
And that sounds really grandiose, but it was clever in my brain, so I said it, but it's certainly not that serious. But I was talking to somebody else about What Are You last night. I was hanging out with some friends, and just kind of the idea of like the fundamentally different ways that artists visualize things happening, right? Like there's not, I will have characters that I sort of like construct maybe out of nothing or out of something else, but it's largely kind of like looking inward and then building up onto something and then putting it into a situation. So this might be a very difficult question, but like what is that like to have characters kind of come to you and live with you that are like kind of fundamentally separate from you?
Well, it's just a kind of haunting, but I think of all of life as being haunted. We are really permeable consciousness, you know, and things come to us and they get kind of lodged in us. It's just like that, you know. It's the same as if you have, and I don't want to call it pathological, and so I'm not going to compare it to any kind of like, you know, psychological issue or trouble, because I don't think it's troubling, not for me anyway. You know, when you have something that you really can't stop thinking about, or you can't stop feeling about, or it's just with you, you know, it's either an idea or maybe a book you read or a movie you saw or a conversation you had with somebody, whatever it is, when it haunts you and it just sticks with you and you get this sense that you can't just shoo it away, you know, or if you do try to shoo it away, it's going to keep coming back. You have to actually deal with it in some meaningful way, process it, understand it. That's what it's like when a character comes to me. It's like, you know, I guess maybe I could compare it to having a child, because you know what it's like to have a child. Someone hands you a child, you, if you have a conscience, you're not just going to say, all right, cool. Like I'll set it in the crib and walk away for the rest of the day. Like you're going to tend to this thing. It's kind of like that. There's a bit of responsibility involved, but then I don't want to get too, I don't want to sound self-righteous or righteous about it at all, you know, because it's not as though I'm on a grand mission from God. Or if I am, I don't know, you know, I'm not entitled to have that knowledge, I don't think. But it's like a haunting, and it's something that I've always had my whole life. I think it's part of the reason why I started writing. I also sang so much when I was a kid. Singing was how I dealt with it. But then I got, you know, shy as I went through life and got, you know, battered by life the way we all do. Then I spent more time writing than singing, and it's just what I've always done to deal with the haunting.
I took a similar path with regard to singing a lot as a kid, and then turning that into poetry and then into prose, and now I'm like kind of being pulled back into more poetics, but sticking to prose, and that's interesting. It must just be, at least in part, the sort of like physicality of singing. Like it feels good to really get it out there.
Yeah, you're literally using your body as an instrument. I think there's something very special about that. It's also so simple. You know, I remember being so incensed when I was a kid and people would ask me, do you play an instrument? Because I didn't play an instrument. And I would say, well, I sing. Am I not allowed to call myself an instrument? And they looked at me like I was insane, you know, because I was just a kid. You don't know when you're a kid.
Right.
But you're not supposed to say weird things like that, but it's all right.
Well, now that you're an adult with books and academic papers, you can say things like the body is an instrument, and people will go, oh, yes. Very good. Yes, that's right. It is like that.
Sometimes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, sometimes I get enthusiastic agreement. Sometimes I don't, and that's fine. It's good. Sure.
Yeah. Especially in the age of Twitter, enthusiastic agreement is hard to come by, I think.
I know. It's such a weird landscape. It's harsh. It's harsh out there. It's harsher than the desert in a way.
Yeah. Well, because the desert just is. You're either prepared for it or you're not. You don't know. You don't have things constantly coming at you.
Yeah. The desert has such beautiful silence too. You know, we don't really have that with social media. No. It's hard to find silent social media.
Not particularly. That would be an interesting experiment, but I don't know how you would make that happen.
I don't either. I've thought about that too, because I think I'm probably just quieter than, I'm really quiet most of the time. Then when I'm not, I'm really, really not. I think What Are You is like to me, it's a very loud book. There's some incredibly loud moments, like cacophonous moments. But for the most part, I'm really a pretty quiet person, and I have a quiet voice. And when I need to project, I absolutely will, but that's not my default mode. And so I've thought, like, how can I use social media in a way that feels more interesting to me? And the way that it would feel more interesting to me is to be more quiet, but I don't really know how to be quiet on social media. I really don't. I've tried. Maybe sometimes I feel like I get there, but it's a it's a paradoxical state, which is fine. I live inside paradox. We all do. I'm okay with that. But it's like maybe an especially noisy time. And so, yeah, it's a puzzle. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's hard because you have to break the silence to encourage other people to be silent. And then
I know. What's the point, right?
then what is it you're doing? It's, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you is an interesting thing for me. I love second person. I've written
Yay. Yeah.
2 things in second person, 2 book length works in second person. With sort of the way I use second person, and this is a bit of a recap, but for long time listeners, but the way I use second person is you is the reader. And so I tend to not have the you character be very defined so that the reader would be able to fill in themselves.
Yeah.
Which can make it a little hairy to read a book like What Are You?
Yep.
Because then I'm like being interrogated for things that are like not things I've done or things that are adjacent to things that I've done or things that I've thought. I think it's serendipitous that Sarah Gerard is blurbed on the front cover, because true love, while not in second person, kind of also made me like confront myself in certain ways. Just
interesting.
Some of the male characters that were, I think, presented to not be super likable reminded me a little bit too much of myself, and I was like very uncomfy about it.
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell Sarah. She'll be really happy to hear that, I think.
We had her on the show, but I don't know if I was that honest about how I was feeling. So feel free to.
Yeah.
I really enjoy her work a whole lot.
Yeah, me too.
I wrote her a fan letter after I read Binary Star.
Yeah.
And
yeah, she's special.
And so yeah, I was talking to one of my friends about What Are You and about second person, and she's just like, oh no, I don't do that. I construct a you outside of myself. That the writing is on. I was like, oh, that would have been way easier for me to get through the book without feeling so bad the whole time. And
so you felt interrogated by it.
I did, and it's interesting. Well, because, and again, I was thinking about Charlene's writing, particularly Psychros, because I had just finished I'm From Nowhere and went right into What Are You? And so I was kind of like in that same mode of the thing that, if for listeners who want to listen to that Charlene Elsby episode, I was having a hard time with her main character in Psychros kind of using the language of feminism or tangential sort of feminist ideas to like justify her eventual murder spree.
Yeah.
And I think I had mentioned it in that episode too, but I had just started being fed a bunch of stuff on Instagram from like domestic labor is labor type women posting reels that were as a work from home dad, like making me feel very like on edge. Even if like, and it's been months now since I've seen any of that stuff because I was actively fighting the algorithm because it was weird to be like taking a break from loading the dishwasher to see a handful of reels about how like men don't know how to load the dishwasher.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And
I understand. Yeah.
So all of that was like conflating, and then that was a couple months ago that she was on the show. And so anyway, I was sort of seeing that same sort of like young feminist fury, and especially the first part of What Are You?
Yeah, the first part. I think it changes a lot by the end.
It does, yeah. I think Dave Fitzgerald's Goodreads review does a good job of sort of talking about the more like feminist political aspects of the book than I think I would be able to. Yeah. And I totally have lost where I was going about that.
We can just talk.
But yeah, that's kind of like where I
Yeah.
was at the beginning, and then by the end, you is becoming more nebulous
Hmm.
and maybe internal. And I thought that the book was constructed in a really cool way, doing it that way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that book was kind of a beast to figure out the construction, in part because so much of it at the beginning, so much of it was not written with any kind of conscious plan in mind. Um, it was a book that I wasn't entirely sure this was ever going to be a book. In fact, I was pretty sure it wasn't going to be, until it suddenly was. And actually today is the anniversary, the first anniversary of
really?
it being published. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And I'm now really at peace with it. And I am so thankful for the book. And I actually love it. I think I can say I love it and I'm proud of it. But the first 6 months of its life, I was still kind of in its mood, I guess. And it was a very transformative book to create. It really changed almost everything about me, and putting it out into the world at this time and when everything feels so hyper commercialized. I really wasn't entirely sure how to do any of it. But at this point, I'm just really proud of it and I'm glad it exists. And it's been so beautiful to see it taken up. And it's weird to me that it's being read more than I'm From Nowhere is being read, because to me, Nowhere is just like a very kind of like a more or less a standard plot, at least as standard as I'm probably ever going to get in terms of creating plot and character and narrative arc. And to me, it feels so much more approachable than What Are You? Like, What Are You is, the dark, strange confrontation with the abyss of the self and the world and everything. And it's funny to see it being read so much more than Nowhere was. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I knew nobody when I'm From Nowhere came out, absolutely nobody. And I am from nowhere. Like, I don't have, the money, the connections, the anything to make a book blow up or, to create a big splashy public persona, which is fine. But crafting what I had for What Are You, crafting it into a book was this really interesting exercise in figuring out how weird and wild can I keep it while not potentially losing every reader along the way once the sort of otherworldly stuff begins to enter. And to me, the you shifts with every passing section, and figuring out how to do that, but in a way that would keep attention and keep readers pulled in and drawn in was just this huge, fun challenge. But a challenge, like a real challenge. And I don't know exactly how it was done. I really don't. I mean, in part, it was that I just knew it had to feel a certain way, and I work by intuition and feel. And so I kind of just sensed, in my gut and my intuition when it was in the right spot. And then, an editor helps, of course, too. But I just did it. And I guess I trusted that eventually I would understand why I had needed to make the decisions that I had needed to make. The same thing happened with my first book. I knew there were certain things I needed to do, but I didn't know why. I couldn't explain it. But now looking back, I know why I thought what I thought. And I know I was more or less right, even though I'm sure I would change both books if I could now. I would go back and tear them up and throw out so much of them and, just want to change them a lot. But I understood why I was making the decisions I was making, even if I couldn't fully articulate it. And I'm just thankful. And I'm deep into writing another novel right now. And every time I start writing a book and I'm really enjoying it, I start getting this feeling like I might die soon. And so I just get really thankful, really, really thankful that I've been able to do anything I've been able to do. And I don't know what that is about. I've been talking about it with friends, and I don't know, like my partner, who's just he has the perfect sense of humor, for someone like me. He's like, well, maybe you will die, so just write faster. Just get it done. Yeah, I don't know where we started there, but I guess I'm really fascinated by the ways that people have responded to What Are You? Because, there have been some pretty strongly negative reactions that surprised me. Maybe they shouldn't have surprised me, but they did surprise me. And I'm not really sure what that's about. What I guess I'm thankful that anyone has a strong reaction to a book these days and that anyone reads because, people don't read that much, I guess.
Yeah. Do you mind talking about what some of the negative reactions were?
Oh yeah, I don't mind at all. I guess I should say though, like I don't read reviews. I do not go onto Goodreads. I do not go onto Amazon. I don't do any of that. Whatever I read is whatever has been either sent to me directly or like tweeted right at me. I don't go looking for any coverage or reviews because I don't want to know. Too much of that is, I know myself, too much of that is not going to help me. Especially because like I come from, I spent some time in the academic world and I sort of have one foot in, and that's a place that's philosophy, especially super, super hostile to women. And now I'm far enough outside of it to see the intense damage that it did to me. And I don't need to go looking for people to like hold me accountable or remind me that I am limited. I know that I'm limited. We are all limited. I don't really need reminders of that. And so there was only one, I don't even know if negative is the right word because I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, and I don't want to make any assumptions about what the authors were actually wanting to accomplish. But there was one review that was really puzzling to me, and I wouldn't have seen it if they hadn't have sent it directly to me. But that one was, I just like I could feel, feels like I felt anger coming off of it. Like there was, to me, it felt like anger coming off of it, like steam. And I just didn't really know what to do with that. Like, I don't know if a book I wrote made you angry, I really don't know what to do.
Yeah.
What can I possibly say or do in response to that? What can anyone do? It's not about me either. If a piece of art has upset you, on the one hand, I think good, it's a good thing. But then on the other hand, what could the creator of it possibly do? Like they can't just pluck it out of existence and take it away.
Yeah. That's interesting. I can kind of I can construct in my brain the type of person who might like read the first part and get pretty grumpy about it. And it, I guess, is bizarre to me why they would have found their way to Clash books in the first place, that kind of guy. But the world is strange, and
It is.
who knows how that might have happened. But and I mean, I don't want to like dismiss, everyone's on their own journey.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I just yeah. I think that there's just, I think because the book is so nebulous that you can have a lot of reactions to it, but it's not so nebulous as to be like completely experimental or something, right? Like I've definitely read less concrete stuff this year even. I think there's just kind of like enough of that ambiguity. Especially with the nebulous you, but there's enough like concrete events that you cover that can be like relatable in a lot of different ways.
Well, and criticism is always so gendered. Gender hasn't entered the scene yet, and it doesn't need to necessarily, but I think it's not just gendered. So much enters criticism, but I think literary criticism is often really gendered. How often do we see a book written by a woman called Navel Gazing Nonsense, and it could be the exact same content written by a guy, and people are like, this is really deep and dark and beautiful. Thank you for going to that place for us, And I just think we should all ask ourselves, like, who sold us on this idea that anything introspective is navel gazing or worthless, not worth our time, right? Like, who really benefits from all of us thinking that introspection through art is a bad thing? or a useless thing or a frivolous thing, or if we code it as, feminine and soft, whatever.
Yeah. My gut reaction to that is like, that's some like bourgeoisie propaganda. Right? You gotta tell people that looking deep at somebody else's introspection is bad and not worth your time, so that you can't empathize with other people better.
Yeah, and so you never do it yourself either, right? You just sort of you can stay a zombie if you want. Just stay a zombie and just do what you're told for the most part.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that there's what was I gonna say? Holy cow, that's weird. They're hitting me with the Havana syndrome or something. Oh, they're hitting me with the rays.
You were talking about what are you?
Yeah. I think that the introspection within what are you is really cool in how it shifts. And I guess I kind of want to go back to that push and pull between like agency and desire. And I noticed that like reading the outside of the book, that there's lots of different people referring to like dichotomies. Sarah says desire and shame, innocence and experience. Nate Lippens has fiercely direct and enigmatic at the same time. And even it's not the blurb, the synopsis or whatever, sales pitch, slow and fast, soft and hard, drunk and sober, performs its own destruction and recreation. I guess, so is that a thing that was conscious? And I know you said that it was kind of like fragments that got put together, but like, I guess in that putting together process, was that a thing that you were kind of like looking at clashing extremes?
Yeah, at some point I realized I found language for it. At some point I realized like, oh shit, I'm writing an everything book. It contains everything. This is one of those everything books. And that means every polarity, every single polarity is always present. And so of course it's kind of maddening, but that's the kind of realism that I want to achieve. I don't need realism in terms of, the outside political world. Maybe one day I'll write one of those books, but for this book, what mattered to me, once I understood it was a book and I was more consciously constructing it, even though there was still some unconscious elements for sure. It was everything all at once, all the polarities, every moment of love also contained a bit of hate or the seeds of hate, and vice versa. And there was no writing out of that. There was only writing, only through, no out. And so it's sort of like I accepted the challenge of the book. I wasn't always sure I wanted to, even after it was out. I wasn't sure I wanted to accept the challenge of this book, but I did. And now I'm really pleased with it. Pleased with the fact that it exists,
right?
and that I exist too. Part of the writing of this book was understanding what it means for a person to exist, as a singular individual, but also never as a singular individual, always as a node within a network, within a node, within a network, within a node, within a network, ad infinitum. It was working through all of this. It was expressing all of this. It was living into it and through it, and understanding there was no other way for this particular human instantiation that is me. There was no other way for me to live. This book, it simply needed to be written. And I knew that whatever I did on the other side of it would be interesting to me.
Yeah.
That's all I can do.
Yeah, I wonder if I would be better served to go back and read this someday and allow myself to be the I sometimes.
Yeah.
And if that would change the reading of the book. I think it certainly would. Because I placed myself kind of like in opposition to the narrative there was that like interrogation that I was talking about, but also sometimes, I don't know, I probably could have allowed myself to get into the narrative as well by being like, oh, in this chapter, I'm more of the I and less of the you.
Yeah.
Which, who knows? I think that maybe some of the people who are having a harder time with the book would have an easier time doing that. It's trying to understand where you should be in relation to the text is an interesting question kind of in general, I think.
Yeah, and that's one that I don't have an answer to, and I think we should be really suspicious of anyone who tells you exactly where the reader and where the writer is in relation to the text, because it's not that simple. To me, the relationship is never going to be that simple. And to read a book is actually a very creative act, I think. It's an act of creation in and of itself, let alone writing it, but reading it as well. And so I think, it's really probably a very important part of being a reader, to play around with the relation to the book's subjects, to the book's characters, maybe the writer or maybe not, because I don't know. I don't know what any of us know about any writer or any creator of anything. I really don't know. We sure seem to think we know a lot, but I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, we're with the types of writing that we cover on the show, like we're generally not super close to like the hero's journey kind of idea, but I guess I haven't really thought about like swimming through different positions with relation to the text. Like sometimes I'm in it, sometimes I'm in opposition, sometimes it's reflecting me. Whereas, you know, because oftentimes I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction too. It's my inner child living through the adult me who has time to read books and whatever. And like, it's always so easy to identify like what type of person is supposed to be represented with what type of character. And that's an interesting skill in itself that I think is probably why I stopped trying to write fantasy books and started writing weirder stuff, because I just don't know enough people to be able to successfully write.
Yeah. Well, this is what I mean, you could successfully write whatever you want, you know, that's up to you. But I mean, part of what I think what I was sort of getting at earlier was the fact that I don't want to write books that offer the reader or the writer a very clear sort of set of rules for how to approach or how to engage, you know, and how to understand oneself in relation to a text. To me, a book is always an environment, always. And you enter an environment as a sensitive being who's, you know, ready to be infected. You know what I mean? Literally ready to be infected by everything around you, everything in the environment. And so you enter the environment of a book and you feel it out. You read the room, you know, and you're in one corner of the room for a while, and then maybe you get up and you walk over to the other corner of the room. You know, it's a living relation. It's not, to me, it's not static. It's not fixed. And this ties into your question about desire and the push and pull between desire and identity. It's all related. Like the way that we fall in love is also the way we read a book. You know, it's the way we engage with the world. And to read a book, to enter the environment of a book, is to possibly fall in love. And when you're going to fall in love, you don't know exactly what you desire. You are open. You are radically open to the possibilities, and things unfold in front of you. And if you want to be closed off, you can be closed off, but then your engagement with the book or with the world or with the person is going to be possibly less rich and possibly or probably more rule bound. To me, that's not particularly interesting when it comes to artwork. You know, I didn't get into writing books because I wanted rules. You know, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And yeah, so in a way, I don't really know what else to say about any of my work at
Right.
all.
That's fair. I'm constantly being brought back to one of my college classes where the professor was the class was called argument and analysis. It was like a communications class
Okay.
because broadcasting degree. And he was talking about like the Freudian idea of the ego and the id and the superego, and was going off on this tangent that I can't remember how he got there, but he ended it with saying, what if our brains are just like an antenna? And I could tell he lost the room, but that has stuck with me since.
Oh, he lost the room with that?
It really seemed like it. And
That's
again,
just getting good.
you have to understand, this wasn't a philosophy class. This was a communications class. So it was a whole bunch of like ad and PR people who wanted to be sports broadcasters. And then it was just like me, like he and I bonded outside of class because we were both listening to the Buddhist Geeks podcast at the time.
Oh, nice.
And I think he's a German guy who I think went to, and I'm going to get it wrong, one of like the Kantian namesake university in Germany before coming to America, perhaps. There's no way I could guess, but like I could tell he was very much a philosophy guy, and that's why he was teaching that specific class about argument and analyzing arguments. Which I wish I had been in a better place to take more from that class, but I could say that about every class I had in college.
Yeah, always. Yeah, same.
The 20s is your early 20s is a really bad time to be in college, I think. Unfortunately, it's also the most like logistically effective time to be in college. But man, oh man, if I could do it again, I'd have earned that debt. But yeah, so where is your philosophy background in?
Well, as an undergraduate, I had no like plan of study. Do you know? I just I took a philosophy 100 class. It was just an intro class, and I loved that. Really loved that. But as an undergraduate, my philosophy education was like very standard analytic philosophy. I didn't really have any of what they call the continental stuff, which is what I ended up specializing in. I didn't really have any of that at all as an undergraduate until my very last year. And it was coincidentally the first time I had ever taken a philosophy class with a woman. She was the only woman in the department. She was a brand new hire. It was like tremendously controversial that she was hired.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember I was like part of the student hiring committee, you know, because I was a very, very good student. And so like I was there for part of the deliberation, and it was very, very heated, extremely heated. When I think back on some of the things that those men that I really looked up to, some of the things they were saying, why did I not see that they were thinking of me that way too, right? As someone with quite literally half a brain. At any rate, my focus in philosophy, once I got to graduate school, I took a detour because I needed to work, and so I was a teacher for a while, and then I went to grad school. But there I ended up focusing on Georges Bataille, and continental philosophy in the 20th century. But even that wasn't entirely intentional, because I didn't know what I was going to study when I went back. I just knew that I was not done with philosophy, and I had questions I wanted to pursue, you know, with all of me, you know, with all of my being. And I knew there was really only one way to do that, and it was to try to get into a PhD program where they more or less pay you. You know, it's not you're not really living high on the hog, but, you know, they more or less pay you to pursue those questions you want to pursue. And I just had many questions about what ineffable experience is, or what limit experiences are. You know, I wanted to get at the things that philosophy really struggles to deal with, you know, the limits of our understanding and the limits of language. And those spots where communication breaks down and something slips, that's always been a place of fascination for me. So I found Bataille, because Bataille spends a ton of time in that realm. And it was also because of the people that I was studying with. The professors in a department all have particular specialties. And the person who I thought I was going to work with at university did not end up being the person that I was working with. And there was someone else I worked with, Karen Houle. She was a poet and a philosopher. And she had a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom. And so I worked with her, and I think she helped me make that project, as wild as I needed it to be. And then she really also helped me rein it in and keep it extremely tight analytically. So even though it was a continental project, I was digging into what Bataille called non-knowledge. We were also putting it sort of to work and testing it out as an epistemic concept. So I ended up doing a sort of analytic continental bridge move, which is not easy at all. And, I actually met Charlene in grad school. I don't know if you know this.
I don't.
But yeah, we didn't know each other, actually. We met maybe once or twice in person. And I want to say we went to a couple parties together. But I didn't know her. I never took a class with her. Like, I didn't know her. I didn't know her mind at all. I didn't know her, in fact, until after I had just published I'm From Nowhere. And she reached out to me, and because I think, we were friends on social media, she reached out and said, "Hey, I have some books and I've been looking for a publisher. Would you recommend yours?" And so we started, being in regular contact after that. And, since then, and obviously she's gone on to publish like 24 books.
Oh my God, yeah.
She's just so prolific, and she's so driven and disciplined, and her mind is incredible, beautiful, insane. Love it. Absolutely love it. But yeah, I met her there. We never really did philosophy together, but we are each other's support system also sometimes. Like when I go into the world of professional philosophy here and there for conferences or workshops or events, I know that I can text her and say, like, the guy across from me at dinner treated me like an idiot. She's a person I can always, we can always commiserate, because there's still not a ton of women in philosophy, and it's just so fucking rough out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like Bataille has been haunting this show for a long time.
Yeah.
Because
he's everywhere.
Because Kitchell brought him up. And I think that was maybe my first experience with Bataille. So anyone who will go back and listen to that episode with M. Kitchell he was very patient with me. Because I was like, this was pre me like learning about like the fact that there is serious study into like Western esotericism, which is where most of my like philosophy reading is kind of rooted in these days. And so Bataille comes up there too a little bit with his work on sacrifice.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is interesting, but still way above my head. And then I received from like my sister for Christmas his collection of writings on surrealism, which I recently read, because it was one of the few books of his that doesn't contain eroticism in the title, it feels like. So I was like, I need to read Bataille because I need to understand what my show guests are talking about, and that was the one I got. But that was an interesting one too, just because he was sort of adjacent to them. Kind of in and out and at odds.
Oh yeah. Well, and he had real problems with them. I love his criticism of a lot of the surrealist art movement. He and Breton famously had a huge falling out, and I think like his main criticism of them is that they just really, at the end of the day, they just wanted to make something beautiful. All they cared about was the flower, not the shit that the flower grew out of, like literal shit, cow shit. This was one of his sort of refrains, that all they cared about was the flower and not the shit.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I mean, Bataille, he has these moments, right? He said he sort of, I feel like it's maybe a 20-year cycle or something. Um, but he's also just an important thinker because he was, he set the foundation. He laid a really solid foundation, even though he was kind of an anti-systematic thinker. For someone like Foucault could not have done anything he did without Bataille. Foucault famously said, like, Bataille is the most important thinker of the 20th century. And, people like Deleuze and Guattari, who had big moments, I think they're kind of waning right now, but they're also, even though they didn't like to mention him by name, they were massively influenced by Bataille. A lot of contemporary political thinking, especially around conservation, is very interestingly tied to Bataille's understanding of energy and expenditure. And so he just has these moments, I think, when he sort of comes back around and there's this whole new school of people who are influenced by him in a different way. And I try to I keep up with the scholarship for the most part, but not a ton, especially because now there's so much, like there's all this scholarship on him and fetish and what a fetish is and fetishism, just tons and tons of stuff.
That's so fascinating just from the outside. Like, it's so exciting, and it feels maybe foolishly like more accessible than like kind of like the quantum science stuff that happens. Those are like two things.
Yeah.
Like, I guess when I was in high school, I briefly considered going to school for astrophysics. And I had too much trouble in the advanced physics class I was taking. I was just like, oh no, I'm having so much trouble when it's algebra based, and when it becomes calculus based, I'm going to lose my mind. So like, I always kind of say that I'm a fan of science. I'm similarly like a fan of philosophy. And I love to see just like the title of a paper in somebody's tweet and just be like, oh, I wonder what that is.
Oh, really? That's nice. I think that's good. Philosophy needs all the fans it can get.
So I guess one of the things I teased, and maybe we can even wrap it around to just like reading in general, but like for someone like me who may be able to get their hands on academic papers, but like obviously I took 2 philosophy classes in college. Like how does one even begin to read something like that?
Oh, I don't know. The only thing I tell people, especially when I have young students or extremely beginner students, or, I've taught at the community college in Richmond, one of the community colleges that is, I love working with people who've never ever touched philosophy before, but who have had a great interest. I really think all you need is interest and focus, and you just have to read it over and over again and make notes to yourself and ask yourself, what is happening here? I think so-called secondary literature can be helpful where someone can explain it for you. But also I'd be cautious about leaning too heavily on that because, academics have their own agendas. They really always have their own agendas. And the farther away from academia, the more I can see that, the more I can see that someone's insistence that, so-and-so be read in a particular way has a lot to do with them building their own career, and needing to maintain ties and associations with all sorts of other thinkers and stuff. So I would say all you really need to do is just give yourself over to the text and read it over and over again and ask yourself what is happening here, and then talk about it too. Even people who I was a grad student for years, and there are many books that I wouldn't touch unless I was going to read them with a group of friends who were also working on philosophy together, because sometimes it's just too much, or they're too dense, or there's just too much happening on the page and too much happening off the page that I don't yet know about, or maybe I need a little bit more historical background or whatever. So some texts are just really, really hard to do on your own. But Bataille, for instance, I don't think he's too hard to do on your own if you're willing to just get in there. And, every thinker has their own phases, like some people loved to make fun of Derrida for how difficult he was to read. Well, like when I read some of his stuff, I think this is actually not hard to read at all. This is perfectly clear and wonderful. It's just poetic. It's looping. You know, he's coming around and around to the same point in 100 different ways, weaving a story in, weaving literary analysis in, all of it. Like it's actually quite easy and pleasant to read. But then some of his other stuff, I think like, oh yeah, I see. This is where the criticism is. Like, you know, so I think you really just have to get in there yourself and see, you know, which periods of a thinker's life do I like, you know, which of their work really resonates with me. And also I would say, just pick what you want to read carefully, you know, think of it like, you know, like going into meditation with a question that you want to just sort of slowly let your meditating self work through. Now think of it that way, you know, pick up a book, if you want to think about sacrifice, for instance, and you want to read some Bataille, just go into it asking yourself, okay, what does he mean by sacrifice? What is sacrifice? And just kind of let it wash over you and see what happens. You know, I've known a lot of people who I think read philosophy in such strange ways. And to me, it doesn't make any sense. I think it works for them, but I don't know. It wouldn't work for me. Like I knew someone in grad school who would say, I cannot progress from one sentence to the next until I'm certain I've understood everything in that sentence I just read. And to me, I would lose my fucking mind. I couldn't do that. Also, I need to bathe in it for a while. You know, I really just have to sit in it and let it wash over me. I do that with everything I read. Just let it wash over you. Like I don't need to grasp and understand yet, you know, like down the road, I'll understand eventually, maybe if I'm lucky, you know, just get in there and see what happens. I think there are probably lots of people out there who have like 10-step guides to reading philosophy or mastering the art of argument building. Like you could go anywhere you wanted to with all that shit, but I'd say let your curiosity lead the way and trust your own intuitive mind and heart to know when you've found something that is working for you. Plus, like this is the thing that philosophy should give us is like a really rich relationship with ourselves and with the text. So I'll read chapter 38 or section 38. I'm not sure what it's called. I have an advanced copy here that's all tattered. So I'll read 38 from What Are You? I stay quiet and small, and resignation arrives. But I am not resigned to you, or to you within me. I am resigned to me, that to be a me requires somehow being with you. It makes you less inside me. I don't know how it's possible. Maybe you grew tired of me? I no longer have the world, and somehow that gives me a world. I can't quite explain it. The space where you were grows and grows, and I think it's no longer emptiness itself. I think it might be care. I think it might be the place from which I care. Yes, I'm a fool, but I'm not that kind of fool. I know what I'm doing. Washing dishes in a sandstorm, building a house in a flood zone, singing in my best voice to a room full of deaf school children. You still growing inside me, or me growing in you, or both? They say it's either bloom or decay, but we both know it's both. Always. Every last one of them lied to me about you. They didn't mean to lie. I know they were just reporting what they knew, but it was not enough for me. They did not know what I had. They did not have what I have. Maybe they're to blame, not you, not us. There are some kinds of intimacy I cannot expect anyone to understand. No one can help me make sense of them. I'm not saying that I'm healed, that I'm whole. Deception is still sometimes the law of the land here, and I like it. I like it. What does that tell you about me? You didn't know I was capable of it, did you? I hid it. I hid it well. You don't know the half of it, baby. You never did.